We know it as Kolatsiakl. In the language of the Mansi people that lived there, it was a reference to a lack of game for hunters in the area. But in 1959, a group of hikers ended up in the middle of one of the biggest mysteries ever known. And the mountain they were on, Kolatsiakl, became infamously known by its translation, Dead Mountain. What was the Dyatlov Pass Incident? The name Dyatlov comes from Igor Dyatlov. See, Igor was a bright guy. He lived in the Soviet Union and was a student in the Ural Polytechnical Institute and an avid hiker. But he wasn't alone, so meet the group. Zinaida, Ludmila, Rustem, Alexander, Nikolai, Semyon, Yuri, another Yuri. We're missing one more person, a third Yuri, but we'll get to him later because he had a slightly different story from the others. Dyatlov requested permission from the local Committee of Physical Culture and Sport for an expedition involving himself and 9 other students he had found. According to records, the committee approved the expedition for not just 10, but 11 people. The 11th person we already met, Semyon Zolotaryov. He was older and no longer a student, but was experienced with hikes and had recently been certified to go for a hike with a similar level of difficulty. The group went through some minor changes in membership composition, but when the route books were received, the Dyatlov group in its final state left to Sverdlovsk. Next, they would take a train to a smaller town called Ivdel. From there, they would take a truck to Vizhai, a small village which was the last stop before they would start the hike. On January 27th, the hike began. The plan was to reach Mountain Otorten before heading back. The next day, however, our guy Yuri Yudin wasn't feeling well. He had health problems and was suffering from knee and joint pain with just the first day. It was no surprise that he turned back. This decision saved his life and haunted him till the day he died. Dyatlov had told others beforehand that he would send a telegram to their sports club as soon as they got back to Vizhai. The planned date was the 12th of February, but when Yudin was leaving, Dyatlov told him it might take longer. So the 12th of February had arrived, and no word from Dyatlov or any of his group. And that was the case for more than a week. On the 20th of February, some relatives of the hikers began concerned and demanded a rescue operation. First, it was just volunteer groups from the institute. Then the police became involved. Soon enough, even the army started searching. On the 26th of February, the hiker's tent was found. Its location, Kolatsiakl, Dead Mountain. The tent was badly damaged, with no one from the group anywhere near it. The tent had been cut open from the inside. The group's belongings and shoes were left behind. There were 9 sets of tracks leading from the tent. The footprints indicated that the hikers were either barefoot, wearing only socks, or a single shoe. After 500 meters, the tracks were no longer visible and were covered by the snow. At the edge of the forest, underneath a pine tree, 2 bodies were found next to the remains of a fire. They belonged to Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. The bodies were clothed only in underwear. The branches of the tree were broken up to 5 meters high. Between these 2 bodies and the tent, in slightly different places, 3 more bodies were found. These were Zinaida Kolgomorova, Rustem Slobodin, and the man himself, Igor Dyatlov. The poses of their corpses suggested that they were attempting to return to the tent. A medical examination determined that there were no injuries in the 5 bodies found that would lead to their deaths. All 5 members had died from hypothermia. And while that might be a mystery, what happened next really shifted the opinions of everyone involved. See, for a while, there was no new evidence pertaining to the other 4 members of the hiking group, but over 2 months later, in May, the rest of the bodies were found. The evidence gathered didn't make any sense and spawned a massive collection of conspiracy theories that questioned the official conclusions to this day. The 4 bodies were found at the bottom of a creek. The running stream of water caused soft tissue damage to their heads and faces. Kolevatov was missing his eyebrows, Zolotaryov was missing his eyeballs, and Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and facial tissue. The crazy part, while the first 5 bodies had no fatal injuries, 3 of the newly found bodies did. Dubinina and Zolotaryov had chest fractures, and Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage. The forensic expert on the case determined that an extremely high force would have had to create this damage, one stronger than that of a human. There were, however, no external wounds that were considered fatal. There was no reasonable explanation for anyone to have been able to do this. To add to the mystery, on multiple hikers' clothes, high traces of radiation were found, amounts that were more than could have possibly been obtained without encountering something radioactive. The investigators were baffled by the evidence, and in 1959, the official conclusion was that the deaths were a result of an overwhelming force. There was no explanation. There was no declared guilty party, and the files were sent to a secret archive. Years passed, then decades. In 2009, the Soviet Union hadn't existed for over a dozen years, and the diaries of the hikers went into the Russian public domain. This spawned a renewed interest in the case, and more questions to be asked. Conspiracy theories came up about one of the members of the group, Semyon Zolotaryov. In 2018, Zolotaryov's remains were exhumed, and the suspicions of many were affirmed. Not only was his name not on the list of those buried in the cemetery, but a DNA test also done on the body buried there did not match the DNA of Zolotaryov's current relatives. More reports were made to reconfirm that this was indeed Zolotaryov, but the damage had been done. Were the new reports lying? Is this part of a conspiracy, or just terrible bureaucracy? Was another man hiding under the name of Semyon Zolotaryov after World War II? Many people like this theory, and it's not too hard to see why. He had an interesting past, one that more and more people developed their theories on. Other theories claim that Zolotaryov was a secret service agent of the Soviet Union, and this information is being covered up to this day. The theories are endless because the evidence can suggest many different possible occurrences. Maybe the native Mansi tribes are responsible for the deaths of the hikers. The Mansi regarded the territory as part of their hunting grounds, and a tent-like structure marking their territory was found about a kilometer away. The trees and branches near the first 2 bodies were most likely cut with knives, so why were no knives found with any of the members? There were reports of strange lights in the sky at the time of the group's disappearance, and many have claimed this to be evidence of paranormal activity. We don't know exactly what happened, and when some questions are answered, more questions arise. Here's something that happened somewhat recently. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. This investigation was somewhat ridiculous, and was limiting itself to the possibilities of an avalanche, a slab avalanche, or a hurricane. Other possible conclusions, like the involvement of crime, were not even being considered. As a result, even more questions were raised as to why such negligence occurred with the investigation. To add to the issues, a government official that was part of the investigation was reprimanded for incomplete official compliance. What happens next? We don't know. The bureaucratic system in Russia stalled further inquiries into the case. We might never know what happened. Maybe it really was an unexplained, overwhelming force.